Hello and welcome to another episode of AI Security Ops with our illustrious guests from BHIS. We have Brian Fehrman and Bronwen Aker, and we have a new panelist today. We have Jack Verrier. Jack, welcome.
Hey.
And of course, you've got me, Joff, one of the usual faces on the show. So before we get into this, first of all, this show is brought to you by Black Hills Information Security. If you have an artificial intelligence deployment in your organization and you are looking for an AI assessment related to your deployment, we would be happy to help you. So please reach out to us. Go to blackhillsinfosec.com, click on the Contact Us button, wherever that is on the website. I'm sure it's somewhere, and we can try to help you out. Today's episode, we are going to field some questions from our listeners, and we are, as a panel, going to attempt to answer those questions. So without further ado, let's pull up the questions and pick one. And I'm going to allow Brian Fehrman to pick a question for us. Brian.
Sure. Let's do the first question here. All right, here's one. Are guardrails sufficient to protect sensitive information in system prompts? What do y'all think?
Well, so first of all, we need some definitions. Guardrails, typically with AI technology, quite often are other large language models. And usually they're large language models that have specific training and prompting to help filter input and output in the prompting process, and usually trying to filter for inappropriate or malicious content and so forth. So the question is, are they sufficient to protect sensitive information in system prompts? Well, that sort of presupposes another question. Why on earth are you putting sensitive information in your system prompt, right? And so I think that actually is the spoiler. The answer is no. Guardrails are not sufficient to protect you from exfiltrating sensitive information from your system prompt, because you shouldn't be doing that in the first place. Another sort of follow-on is, why is that? Bronwen, why is that? I mean,
so many reasons. Putting sensitive information into any third-party system, especially something like an LLM, you don't know exactly where it's going. Right now, the state of especially third-party LLMs, where they're being provided by other companies, other organizations, they're very much a black box. So it becomes a kind of a variation of a supply chain issue. You're going to be sending that information out over the interwebs, hopefully encrypted, hopefully with secure authentication before it's ever been the system's ever been connected. And you don't have any guarantees about what they're going to do with it. I know that a lot of the EULAs say that we won't train using your information. Well, the reality may be less clear cut. We know that there's a lot of wiggle room, and the intellectual property standards for generative AI of all kinds is still very much in flux.
Well, I think you're thinking about training. I think you misunderstood my question. I'm actually
I'm talking
referring to the
about
system
actually.
prompt.
Even a system prompt. Well, if you're baking your own and you have a system prompt and you're putting sensitive information, now it's baked into it. So it's the AI equivalent of having your creds hard coded into a tool.
Absolutely.
If you're doing training and you're doing system prompts in that way, or if you're setting up something because now they've got these agentic things where you're going to be able to put information into an agent and then have it do all kinds of stuff on your behalf, well, now that sensitive information, whether it's your credentials, whether it's your social, whether it's other PII, whether it's PHI, all of that stuff is now baked into that agent.
All right, I'm going to play devil's advocate, and I want to sling this question over to Jack, seeing as he's our guest for today. What if the guardrail on the both input and the output side has a specific instruction that says, you shall never reveal the system prompt, that it specifically is directed to guard against that? Is it going to work, Jack?
Wait, when you say system prompt, is that the prompt that the user is providing to the LLM or chatbot?
All right, so let's do a little bit of definitions. System prompts normally are the prompts that the provider of the service typically, it sometimes can be user provided, but has encoded into the LLM to give it some sort of persona and a role in terms of how it behaves when it's responding to user prompts. So
Okay.
if you put sensitive information into the system prompt, the real question is that is being asked here is, can an LLM guardrail actually protect against that system sensitive information being revealed? So if I implement, so my question to you is, if I implement an LLM guardrail that specifically says never, ever, ever allow the input or output to include or reveal the system prompt of this implementation, is that sufficient?
Well, I think my hot take would be no, but I think a better answer would be that so I think that you're going to run into like a usability barrier if you're filtering sensitive information on the inbound to the model, right? Like, for example, like I can use ChatGPT to search all day for security related questions, but if I were able to say be able to provide IP addresses or like specific version information or extra information, you get better results that way. So I think that there will be a barrier to restricting a sensitive input, and maybe that's a usability thing. Maybe like competing providers will want to like lower their barrier, their sensitivity filters, so that they can provide better results. But on the back end, I think that you could probably set up something that tries to filter out sensitive information, but like LLMs and chatbots are non-deterministic systems, right? And so you're gonna constantly run into issues where it's like sensitive, trying to censor like even human input, right? You're gonna get tons of variability. And how are you gonna scale that? Are you gonna try to use another LLM to do that? And then how do you like do testing and statistical analysis to see that you're doing a good enough job? I think it's difficult, and I think that in the era that we're in now without a lot of regulation, I think you're really putting a lot of faith into the provider of that service to do a good job.
I'll be honest with you. I think you guys are overthinking it. Don't. You cannot protect that application from revealing its system prompt, period. No matter what guardrails you put there, almost all of them are bypassable. Bronwen, you have your hand raised.
Well, I was going to say that the best of guardrails are still potentially susceptible to prompt injection or jailbreaking. And we're still so new that we haven't figured out how to truly bulletproof these systems against injection and jailbreaking. And the whole point of those activities is to get to sensitive information that has been stored or baked into the models.
Right. And here's the other thing, right, that I've realized, and I know Brian has, and Derek and others, that as we've been working with LLMs, is LLMs are awfully compliant. All you have to do is keep asking them to do something, and eventually they just do it, right? So, they just don't say no. So, I don't know. My whole take on this is no, guardrails cannot protect. Shall we move on to another question? Or Brian, do you have a final word? Give you a
No,
turn.
I think everyone kind of hit the main points. When it comes down to it, treat the system prompt as inherently insecure. I mean, you can put as many different padlocks on it as you want to, but ultimately you're going to be able to get through them. I mean, you could make the argument for about a lot of security things, but there's really little reason to be putting sensitive information into the system prompt. So, I mean, you're basically creating yourself a problem and then trying to solve the problem by using measures that are not actually going to make it secure in the end. So rather than try to fix the problem, just don't create the problem in the first place, essentially.
Yeah, 100%. I'd like to pick the next question because I'm very excited about this one. So if
All
you
right.
guys don't mind.
Yeah, do it.
The question is, how do you guys explain hallucination and confabulation with LLMs, presumably? How do we explain that? I'll go back to Jack. Jack, you want to take a punt at this one?
Well, my first the first thing I was about to do was Google confabulation, figure out what that means. So I may have to take second.
I'll help you out on that one real quick, and then we can toss it back over to you for your thoughts. So, because I kind of had to look this one up too. So the idea is that confabulation, there's a push to use that word to replace hallucination, with the idea that hallucination is more of like a sensory perception issue that is more pertinent to humans in terms of we have visual hallucinations, we have auditory hallucinations, whereas confabulation is more accurate when we're talking about LLMs that are kind of making up information, but they're still like it's kind of one and the same. So basically, just consider confabulation kind of the new term for hallucination. And so, what are your thoughts on basically explaining why LLMs hallucinate or confabulate? I'm sorry, we'll start using the new terms. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it probably goes back to like how noisy the data sets were, right? So I mean I don't really know enough about the data sets that a lot of large models are trained on, like specifically, but when you have like if you have a really huge data set that you're training a model on, right, you're going to get all kinds of inputs, right? And then unless you do like a really good job of data cleansing, you're going to get that kind of same variability in output, right? So it's possible that whenever Grok was getting trained, fascist or whatever views got swept up into that, and now it's echoing that. That's a possibility, right? So I think you're gonna. I think as long as the train set is, pretty wild, I think that you will get pretty wild outputs. But
Okay.
I'm sure somebody
Fair
has
enough.
in that.
Bronwen, do you want to take a shot at that one?
Sure thing. One of the standard parameters used when you're creating a new model is called temperature. And temperature is a range from 0 to 1, and it helps define how rigid or not its responses are going to be. So for example, if you have a very low temperature and you enter the same prompt in 3 times, you're probably going to get exactly the same response. Whereas if a model has a high temperature and you hit the same prompt 3 times, you're going to get similar but different responses. So that's one factor. Another factor has to do with how the prompt is constructed. And when prompts are constructed sloppily, for lack of a better word, or without a lot of context, then what the LLM, mostly since we're talking about confabulation and it sounds like more text, it's going to try and create something that it thinks is the kind of thing you want to hear. And the current state of LLMs, with a few exceptions, is that they're not necessarily reality checking sources for content. And LLMs are probabilistic. They're basically sophisticated autocompletes. So they're based on this chain of, oh, here's this word, this is what I think the next word is going to be. And so that leads to a lot of this confabulation, a lot of this generation of stuff out of thin air because it sounds like what it believes would probably come next based on what you've asked. So there are ways, again, good prompt engineering, good context, good specification of what kind of output, but always, always, always reality check the content as if you have been provided it by a drunken intern.
I love that.
That's great.
I do want to make one slight correction. Temperature dial is not so much in training; it's more in inference, which is when you're using the model. Just one point of clarification there. The other thing that I would say, and the way that I look at it, is generative pre-trained transformer architectures, which is what every LLM is today, right? In that decoding mode, produce a probabilistic distribution for next word token prediction, right? So next token or next word, either way, they often amount to the same thing. That probabilistic distribution, if the temperature dial is low, is going to favor a few words, not necessarily a lot of words. If you raise that temperature dial, what it does is it flattens out the probabilistic distribution so that the LLM will favor more words, and it will randomly pick from that greater number that are at a more equal value in terms of the probabilistic distribution. So it's just pure statistics. It will hallucinate more if the temperature dial is set higher, without a doubt, because the probabilistic distribution of the next word token prediction is actually just being flattened. And so it's just pure math. Brian, any further comments on that?
Yeah, a couple thoughts on it. So, like the other thing that I like to throw in there too, besides just the probabilistic nature of it, is that LLMs. It seems like they the analogy I give is like if you've ever like met a person who just refuses to ever say I don't know, but they'll just like give you an answer anyways, even if it's not correct. I think that LLMs still sometimes fall into that category where they're not really trained to just say I don't know. I mean, unless you really explicitly tell them to tell you when they don't know, they will usually still generate up some kind of an answer, even if they don't have the correct facts to be able to provide you with an accurate answer. They'll still spit something out, and I think that's part of the issue too. I do think in terms of mitigating it, one of the guardrails that I've seen that have come out for that is what's called grounded reasoning, which is it's you provide it with the set of information. And of course, this is going to be very narrow in scope because, I mean, you can't just provide it with the entire internet, right? And what's on the internet isn't necessarily correct. But let's say within your organization, yeah, you want an LLM that pertains to company policy or other kind of domain specific information. You can actually provide it with that data so that when the LLM comes back, it has to check its answer against that grounded reasoning or that grounded source. And if it is not, if it doesn't match up, then it just won't send an answer. It'll say, I don't know. And the fun thing you can do to play around with that is you can actually give it incorrect information as a grounded source and have fun games with that and see what it outputs. So
I was actually going to make a comment on that. Bronwen alluded to that as well, in terms of sort of prompt confusion. If you give an LLM some conflicting prompting, you can definitely get it kind of confused in its generative process, which is kind of equivalent to flattening out that probabilistic distribution, right? You're just getting it to have more conflicting vectors in the sentiment analysis as it comes out of the engine, which makes it do weird, wonderful, wacky, and creative things. So, all right. Well, I think we've covered the waterfront on that. Jack, you got another comment on that?
I was wondering, is there a benefit to like raising the temperature and like flattening that distribution to like get more diverse responses? Like,
unless
Depends
you're
on the use case.
if you're in an altered state of mind, I think maybe there's a benefit. It's to me, it kind of depends on your use case. If you're looking to kind of brainstorm some ideas and maybe you want to truly be in a mode where you're being a little bit more creative, it might be fun to do, and you might get some things that interest you. But if you want the LLM to give you less than factual information for whatever reason, that would be something that you might want to do as well. So
I wanted to add one last thing, is that this business with confabulation is just one more bit of evidence. I mean, objective, verifiable evidence that these tools are not truly intelligent. They don't actually understand what it is they're saying. They're using probability and statistics to generate content based on the programming and instructions they've been given. And that also includes being very sycophantic at this point.
yeah, that's right. They are simulating reasoning is what they're doing, and that's not real cognitive reasoning. It's simulated cognitive reasoning, which is a term I've used before. That's absolutely true. Let's pick another one. Who wants to pick the next question? I'm going to throw it. Anybody excited about any of the questions? You want to jump in?
I'm curious about the how is AI and GDPR interacting? Curious to see if anyone
interesting.
has,
Okay, that's down the list a little bit. How does AI relate to GDPR?
yeah.
Okay. This is, okay. I would like to jump in here. First of all, this is a very, very deep rabbit hole, is the first thing I'm going to say. The Europeans are one of the first groups on the planet to actually attempt to craft some comprehensive AI guidance in terms of their legislation. It is not in GDPR, to my knowledge, so I don't think it has a relationship to GDPR. And that's about all I know. There's lots of disparate legislative efforts in the United States that vary on a state-by-state basis. I have not seen privacy in particular kind of crossover with AI in any particular forum, but maybe somebody else has. So, Bronwen,
Yeah,
Brian?
yeah, I think probably, I mean, one of the main issues is going to relate to, if you taking AI out of the equation and just looking at the traditional like infrastructure that is in place that GDPR is already addressing, which, I mean, primarily storage of data, who has access to the data. Are you able to basically get a hold of someone and say like, hey, what data have you kept on me? Or what data you currently have on me? Can I have that? And I want you to get, basically delete it and get rid of it. So yeah, so I'm not sure if there are AI specific rules yet, but there are still, I mean, the data governance that GDPR already provides still applies to the data that we see with AI in terms of storage transmission and, basically who gets access to it.
I wonder how this, interplays with the right to be forgotten. That's something I've really always appreciated about the GDPR and the rights for its to European citizens is you can, go to a platform and say, I want you to remove my data. But in an era where you have like an approximation of somebody's data, like maybe in the weights of a model, I'm like, how would, they couldn't throw away a model because of a GDPR request, right? Those are very expensive. So I don't
Oh
know.
yeah, certainly.
Or
Yeah, I think that,
retrain them. Even the retraining of the models is very expensive. So that's a really good point. But I think it would come down to the the advertised terms of service and the data training process of the actual models themselves. And if you're talking about one of these big frontier providers, I don't know how much. I actually truly haven't looked how much information they actually publish about the way they're collecting the data for training. And the way they're sanitizing the data for training, because that's where it would come into play, I would think.
Well, and we're getting new players in this space all over the place. I know that LinkedIn has announced that they're going to start using user activities to train their AIs, and you can opt out of it. You have to go over the river and through the woods to find the actual toggle to opt out. And but other than that, I really don't have much to contribute that you wonderful gentlemen haven't already said.
All right. Well,
I
let's
I
move
will
on.
take
Seeing as we're not lawyers, let's move on to another question. Um,
I will take the next one. And
okay.
actually it's two questions that are related. The first one is, how do we stay safe using AI? And how can we keep others safe when using AI? And I like those because truthfully, if we're keeping ourselves safe in a way, we're also helping others. But part of it has to do with being aware, treating it as a tool, treating it as something that is still very, very new. And there are reasons why new technologies are called the bleeding edge. And it's going to take a while before things standardize and solidify. So staying safe, first of all, be very, very cautious about sharing any sensitive information with any AI. If you're in an enterprise environment and you're using an enterprise level system, you want to make sure that in-house you have RBAC, you want to have role-based access controls, you want to have logging. You absolutely want to track the behaviors and activities that any AI takes within your environment. And you also want to make sure that just it's not buyer beware, but you want to be cautious. You want to be careful. One other thing that's coming up, and last week I had the opportunity to attend a conference and hang out with a lot of CISOs, and I kept hearing variations of supply chain coming up over and over again. And I think that that's especially for not so much individuals, but organizations and especially multinational corporations. You want to find out what is the supply chain trail that is providing this service to your organization, because you don't know, is a model coming from another nation state? Is it coming from somebody, some random person on Hugging Face? And where is that data going out? How is it being manipulated? What guardrails? Those kinds of questions need to be asked and answered, and they need to be asked seriously, and they need to be answered comprehensively by your vendor.
So I would like to jump in and say this question is way too broad, first of all. I would follow this question if I was standing in front of somebody with, how do you actually even know that you're using AI? Because today, as we are interacting with various services, software services on the internet in whatever forms, we're all using AI at some point in the chain. I would hesitate to guess, right? Because there are various implementations within various software packages, including this very one we are using to record this podcast, which leverage AI APIs to do some sort of data processing, right? So I believe the question was probably intended to address the sort of front and center issue, and that is, when I'm using an AI chatbot like ChatGPT, how do I stay safe? But that is only one aspect of a very deep and wide ecosystem that is actually occurring right now and developing very, very rapidly. Bronwen started going down the road of the supply chain, and that would relate perhaps to organizations that are wanting to develop AI capabilities in existing products or processes in their organization. That's a whole different set of questions there that would apply. My question back to anybody that would ask this particular broad question would be, in any software that you're using today, do you really know that you're using AI or not? And you probably don't, and you probably would find that you are using AI. And then I would go back to terms of service. In any service that you're using, software or otherwise, and if it's an AI chatbot for sure, go read the terms of service. If you go read the terms of service for something like a ChatGPT and you're not a paying customer, you'll find that the data is being used probably for training their next model. Is that something that you want to have happen if the data you're providing is being used as part of the training process for the next model? More than likely, if as to quote Brian Fehrman here, if you are not paying for the service, you are the product, more than likely. In other words, the data you supply is being leveraged as payment. Brian, what comments you got on that?
Yeah, I think both of you covered most of it, because I mean that was one of my thoughts too. Because the first thing that pops in my head is like, well, be careful about what AI you're using and what information you're giving to it. But it's so embedded in everything now. I mean, one day I go to my Gmail and suddenly I've got summaries of my emails, and it's not something that I opted into. And I mean, Google has a lot of my data already at this point, anyways. But nonetheless, I think it's an example of that point, that it's getting crammed into everywhere. And so I just think, it's kind of more of a general statement of just being cautious about who you are trusting your data to, and what are they actually going to be doing with that data? How do they handle that data? Are they going to be reselling that data? Are they going to be using it for training? And are you comfortable with that? Or do you need to look for other services that you can potentially utilize if you're not comfortable with the way that they are handling your data?
Right. So it's a multifaceted question. I think Jack had a comment there. Yeah.
So I'm trying not to put on my tinfoil hat here about like privacy and data consumption and everything, but I think also, like, how are we defining safe? I think that, folks will have different like baselines for what they consider to be safe in terms of what their acceptable levels are of personal data consumption. right? And so I, but I mean, even so, I think if a normal person, reasonable person makes a good faith effort, to maintain that level of privacy, um, we're seeing so much data consumption as a part of like, learning and training AI models and like going forward that there's like, it seems like there's only so much that we can do. There's like prudence, make sure that the terms of whatever service you're using, reflect your values. But it's a difficult challenge, I think, for everyone today because all of our lives are online.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we probably should move on to another question because we'll get stuck there. And I think we have time for maybe one more before we go to the
One more, maybe
Yeah.
like one more quick one. Yeah.
All right. Who's going to pick? We should let Brian pick this one, I think.
Ooh, okay. Let's see here. So let's just I'll just grab one off of here, which is basically how is securing AI different from securing traditional software? What
Oh,
are the differences here?
that's a good one. I think the very first thing we ought to say in response to this question is the nature of the technology itself. We must always keep in mind when we're looking at AI and natural language processing and large language models, they are by very definition probabilistic technologies, which means that if we provide them with the same prompting, you could get different results each time sequentially. If you provide the same prompt 5 or 6 times, you will not get necessarily a deterministic result. So that's the first kind of thing that you want to put out there. The next thing is it depends on the architecture of the system you're looking at. If that output of that AI LLM is agentic and is connected to systems that can query other data or perhaps perform some sort of action that impacts the external real world somehow, then we have, significant issues, I think, mostly from the forensic space. We certainly have a trust boundary there where the external service has to very closely check and make sure that the action that it's receiving from that probabilistic response is an action that it's prepared to actually take. We have a situation where we need to make sure that every action that an LLM actually mandates to some sort of external service is appropriately logged so that we know everything that happened and when it happened. There's way too many systems out there where that is not happening. And then there's another aspect of this, and I'll leave this maybe for others to expound upon. There's many aspects of this, but there's another aspect of this, and that is just sort of the scaffolding around AI-enabled applications. And generally, the scaffolding around AI applications tends to be in the web application and web API space. And that scaffolding, in terms of securing that, is actually no different from securing your traditional web application software. And for some strange reason, some of that scaffolding that we have seen being put out there has taken a step backwards in terms of its security stance. I don't understand why that is the case, but we have seen some situations where the scaffolding is not done as well as prior web applications that we've seen, which is kind of sad. And then finally, before I hand it off to somebody else to expound upon this, there is the whole area of manipulating the LLM to do what you want it to do. And LLMs are very, very compliant. And we have terms such as prompt injection and jailbreaking and data exfiltration that surrounds the manipulation of LLMs. So somebody else take a shot at that now.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with all that, and I think kind of what it boils down to is when we're talking about, what are the difference between securing AI and securing traditional software. I would say that, I mean, in terms of the security aspect of it, there's not a whole lot of difference between that and traditional applications. It's all about, as Joff mentioned, that trust boundary, looking at what does the AI have access to, what data does it have access to, what other systems does it have access to, what other applications does it have access to, and then most importantly on top of that, who has access to the LLM itself. Because you basically got to assume that if someone has access to the LLM, treat it as though they would have access to whatever that LLM has access to. And so that's where I think the real concerns come into play. Sure, there are some AI specific things from a security standpoint, not talking about the safety aspect of alignment and bias and confabulations and all that, but purely on the security aspect, going back to our first question, yeah, I mean, there's the system prompt portion, which is, again, don't put sensitive data in the system prompt. But outside of that, I mean, sure, the way in which you interact with an AI to try to succeed in an attack of getting access to other things, that's a little bit different. But in terms of everything else that goes around that AI application, the ways in which you're going to want to secure that, I mean, it's going to be pretty similar to what we've seen before.
Yeah, there's one other aspect there, Brian, that you didn't touch on that concerns me greatly, and that's in the agentic space. And I'm going to do a webcast in October on this, by the way, surrounding model context protocol. But in the agentic space, often these external actions that LLMs have been granted have the concept of impersonation. And impersonation means they're going to carry some kind of API key. They're going to carry some sort of token that allows them to do something on behalf of another person or another entity. That part of it really, really scares me because, I highly suspect that when we start examining that, we're not going to find sufficient logging and forensics ability around that impersonation, and we're not going to find sufficient securing of those API keys, tokens, or whatever credential is being used for that impersonation activity. And that one is just really frightening for me. Any other thoughts, Jack?
Yeah, I was going to say, I read an article, it might have been by ACM or Usenix, about how agentic AI needs a virtualization space. Like, it needs a way of being sandboxed in and controlled, so that people could test and run these in a safe way. And I think because it's so fast, and maybe we're just at a really accelerated pace, a lot of the safety mechanisms for running traditional software really aren't there with agentic stuff, right? I think the excitement's there, but it seems pretty dangerous, and I think that we're not too far away from, being able to scale whatever programming activities you're doing, reliably, whether it's ransomware operators, a one-person ransomware firm with just lots of bots. I think that the future is happening quickly, and, Guardrails got to keep up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for listening today, everybody. It was good to have you. It was great to have Jack on the show for the first time. We hope to have Jack back again. Brian and Bronwen, as usual. And hopefully everybody stays safe out there and keep on prompting.